No, no, we have to wait. Yeah.
Can we do
Oh, she said, I think it's a good idea to do the drawings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. That makes a big difference, too.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our fifth Hungry for History event. This afternoon's speaker is Gary Ryder. Gary is a former educator at John Marshall High School. He's a past president of the Lions Club and also an esteemed past president of the Marshall County Historical Society. He's also the publisher of several books. He tells me 15 on Marshall County World War II veterans. So I'm going to hand this over to Gary Ryder. Please welcome him.
Well, thank you for coming. And those on Facebook who can't see, there's probably 1,000 people out here in the audience watching this speech. So if you missed it, you really missed a good thing. I'm going to talk today about August 6th, 1945. Now, I wasn't alive then, and I don't think anybody here was alive then. But what is important about August 6, 1945, is that President Harry Truman, who assumed the office of leadership after Franklin D. Roosevelt died, decided he needed to end the war with Japan. And the Japanese really weren't going to give up. If you read stories of World War II veterans in the Pacific, the Japanese on the islands fought to the last man. They fought to the bitter end. They did not surrender. At Okinawa, 100,000 civilian Japanese committed suicide rather than surrender to the Americans because of all the propaganda that they had been fed by the Japanese government. So although we took Okinawa from 100,000 soldiers, 100,000 civilians killed themselves by jumping off cliffs because they did not want to be tortured by those awful Americans. And so these people weren't going to give up. And so Harry Truman decided if we have to invade the island of Japan it's going to cost 1 million American lives. So he decided, as Harry Truman says, the buck stops here, and he decided to drop the first atomic bomb. Now, that bomb was developed by Robert Oppenheimer at Los Alamos, New Mexico, and we didn't do the story on Susan Riley's relative, but Susan has a relative, and she's the director of the Moundsville Library, who worked on that project at Los Alamos. Interesting, a Moundsville connection, that our director of our library had a relative who worked with the project to develop the atomic bomb. They detonated the test bomb at White Sands, New Mexico, turned the sand to glass, destroyed the tower. They didn't know what it would do to people, had no concept of what this would do to people. Robert Oppenheimer, when the explosion occurred at Los Alamos, said, "My God, what have I done?" Because he knew that the military would take that weapon and turn it on people. And he was forever regretful that that was going to happen. So on August 6th, 1945, in the morning, the Japanese were out conducting their daily business. Hiroshima didn't have any fear of American bombers. Some planes were going over. We didn't bomb Hiroshima. Wonder why? They don't bomb us. We must be very lucky. The gods must be watching out for us. No. The American military was watching out for them, saving them for a bomb. This is Nagasaki, 3 days later. Why, we must be very lucky. They've never bombed Nagasaki. Wow. We were saving them for a second bomb. They were untouched. What was the effect of that bomb is entirely what you see in the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So today is the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, or as my old friend John Ginter used to say, Hiroshima. That's the American word, is Hiroshima. And those you young ladies who ever take Japanese, you hear every vowel in the Japanese word. So they say it as Hiroshima. Okay? We're going to talk about the Pacific Theater. We're not going to talk about the European theater, because when Japan was bombed, Germany had surrendered in May of 1945. We directed everything we had at the Japanese. And the Japanese should have quivered, because we had beaten Italy and we had beaten Germany. And now every resource that the Allied powers have on hand is going to be directed at them. And they won't quit. So we're going to make them quit. People like Mary Volks from Marshall County, who worked in Hawaii destroying secret messages that were flowing from the White House to the military to further stations in the Pacific. Her job was to destroy those secret messages. So she was to take them out to a hilltop and burn them so no one could see them. Once the message was delivered, they took it out and destroyed it. So Mary's job was to go, drive them away, and destroy that message. Only one problem, Mary told them, I can't drive. Would someone teach me to drive? Oh no, we're not going to do that. You can't drive. You got to find someone willing to teach you to drive. So Mary kept asking around the post in Hawaii, and finally got an ammunition truck driver, who risked his life every day driving an ammunition truck, to teach her how to drive, so she could take him to this station and destroy these messages. So later in life, Mary Volks said, when I interviewed her, I still drive like I'm driving an ammunition truck, so if you see me, just get out of the way. But she was part of that effort to save American lives if we invaded Japan. Betty Evans. When we did Volume 1 of Marshall County Patriots and Heroes, Betty Evans, who was a member of the Women's Air Corps, came, and she said, my job in Texas was to fly planes. Oh, you're a pilot. Yes, but I wasn't a pilot in combat. The Women's Air Corps was to fly the planes from their destination in the United States to the Pacific Theater, to whatever island they needed these new planes on. Why didn't the crew do it? They were trained to fly in these planes, these 7, 8, or 12 men, depending on the size of the plane. And her answer was, because if we crashed the plane with women aboard, we lost the plane. But the crew still got to the island, and they could get another plane. So women played a big part in the Army Air Corps of World War II. A native from Cameron, West Virginia, Betty Evans. That next year, they had the 50th anniversary of the Women's Air Corps, and Betty lived to go to Washington, D.C. and participate in that ceremony, and she adored it. She's long gone now since then. George Crow. I didn't interview George, but I talked to one of his relatives, and George was a truck driver in the Philippines. Now, Americans dominated the Philippines early in the war. We had a base there, and MacArthur was there. And George got this message: when the Japanese are invading the island and taking it over, mile by mile, they're working their way down the island and taking it over. George Crow from Moundsville, West Virginia, gets a message: come here immediately and pick someone up in your truck and take them to the coast for a submarine pickup. Okay, I'll be there. So he drives. Here's tight security. Someone gets in the back of the truck. He drives them to the coast. They go out to the submarine in a boat, and they say, thank you, you just saved the life of General George MacArthur. Wow. That's cool. When General MacArthur came back to the Philippines and made his, of course, the famous quote is, I shall return. But when I taught school, my students always wrote on the test, I'll be back. Well, I guess it's the same idea, but it's more professional if he, it's, I shall return. He may not have said that. And the Moundsville man came ashore with MacArthur that day. He said, we waded ashore in our shoes and our socks and our pants, and they filmed us coming ashore with MacArthur, and then they had a change of clothing for him, but not us. So we wandered around in wet pants, wet socks, and wet shoes the rest of the day. But MacArthur made his return. William Sims Littman. Well, if you know Reva Eichard, this is her father. And he's in my new book coming out this November. William Sims Littman was a CB. Now, CBs were not combat. They went out, they had rifles and pistols, and they could fight if they had to, and they were under attack while they built things. That was the CB's purpose. They were construction crews. They built airfields, Quonset huts, barracks, water systems, those kinds of things. And he was there on the islands for a good bit of the war, rebuilding things. And Reva has several pictures of him that will appear in the book, of him on these structures working, building things in the Pacific Islands. So again, a nice tie for Moundsville. And Reva's very proud of her father. There are others who had very difficult situations to go through. Everett Tyler, we came across him. He was a POW in Japan. He had been captured, and a lot of American prisoners were sent to Japan. And we don't think that, but they were. They were used as labor. They were used to be chained to lampposts in the Japanese cities so that the Japanese could go by and see the enemy, that they were just human, that they could be defeated as we had defeated this man and this man. And sad to note that Americans did die at Hiroshima. because they were chained to lampposts when that bomb went off. So we did kill some of our own that day. A fact of war. Can't change that. Everett Tyler was a POW. He was severely beaten by his Japanese guards. He managed to escape one night. He's in Japan. Where's he going to go? He's an American. He has nowhere to go, but he escaped just to get away from the beatings that he suffered. They captured him because he stopped at the first Japanese house he found to get food to eat. He was so hungry. They recaptured him, took him back, beat him again to the point that they killed him. Everett Tyler was 19 years old when he died that day in a Japanese prison camp. 19 when he died. Imagine being 17 years old, being a POW, and for 2 years taking this kind of punishment and finally be killed. The guards at the prison were tried as war criminals and spent a long time in jail for the way they treated the American prisoners. Ed Bell, who was one of the first ones we found in Volume 1, because we publicized we were doing these books, spent 34 years in a Japanese prison camp. He didn't tell many people about it. He lived across from the VFW, so the VFW said, "Did you ever interview Ed Bell?" And I said, "Yeah." He told my class. We took the whole class to his house, sat at the dining table, and he told us his story. He said, "Well, he won't tell us anything." Okay, won't tell you anything. But he told us his story so we could record it. And the kids were quiet. I'm not sure any of them breathed for an hour listening to his story. It was amazing. For 34 months, he was in a Japanese prison camp. Now, he was on the Philippines when the Japanese took the island. MacArthur left. The American forces left, except for some guerrilla forces behind. And he was placed on the Bataan Death March. Now, if you know anything about the Bataan Death March, that was brutal. The Japanese marched the Americans 100 miles or more to a prison camp, and along the way they beat them, and if an American fell, they shot them. They hoped you fell down, that you couldn't make the march, so they could kill you. Ed Bell escaped from the Bataan Death March. Don't hear that very often. He found a pool of water, jumped into it when a guard wasn't looking, and he picked up at one of those little bamboo hollow straws along the way. He knew what he was doing, and he got in there and stayed under there and breathed through that straw until the Bataan Death March passed him by. Then he got to the coast, and he got a boat. He rowed out to Corregidor, which was separated from the mainland, and was there with the American troops. They came under attack by the Japanese, and Ed Bell was hit by a mortar shell that broke both his legs. When he woke, the Japanese had taken Corregidor, and a Japanese soldier was trying to take his ring that his mother had given him off of his finger. Well, it was stuck. It wouldn't come off. So the Japanese soldier says, "I want the ring. I'll get my knife out." Ed Bell wakes up. Says, "Wait, I'll give you the ring. Let me get it off." So they take him prisoner. They take him to the prison camp for 34 months and hold him there. His job, as the American prisoners, they weren't labor. They couldn't do labor, was to eat the dirty rice after they cleaned it that the Japanese would not eat. That's all they had, was the dirty rice that the Japanese would not eat. For 34 months, he was in this Japanese prison camp. When he was released, he was 87 pounds. He came home after the war. He went home to his mother, opened the door, and his mother screamed and said, "Who are you?" "I don't know you." I said, "I'm your son." "No, you're not." He had changed so dramatically, he's only 87 pounds, that she didn't even know him. He lost one leg after the war, Ed Bell worked at West Virginia Penitentiary and worked with the amputees over there and made them prosthetic legs because he made his own. Did the Japanese help cure Ed's 2 broken legs? Yes, they did. They fixed both legs with no anesthetic. The surgery on both legs with no anesthetic. So he hobbled around for 34 months on one leg that never did heal. Don Moffin. Don Moffin's long past. He died shortly after we did the story. Shortly after we did the story. Sometimes I feel like the angel of death. Can I interview you? Yeah. Oh, they're gone next week. Oh, can I interview you? Yeah, they're gone next week. I mean, what timing I have sometimes. It makes me feel awful. But at the same time, I have to feel good because I saved the story. And so that little voice in that sometimes tells you to do something, I listen to it. And so Don Moffin came to us in the first book, and he was at Iwo Jima, and he was wounded. Iwo Jima was a bloody battle that the Japanese would not give up the island, and he was wounded with a head wound. They took him to the hospital ship, wrapped his head in a white bandage, and said, "You're going back in. Put your helmet on." And Don Moffin said, "So here I am with a white target on my head going back in Iwo Jima." And he went in and survived. Most of you who are older have heard of Biggie Bayard. Biggie Bayard's very famous in Marshall County. He was in the Navy on the USS Fanshawe in May of 1944 at the Battle of Saipan. The Fanshawe was attacked by 70 Japanese planes. Only one bomb hit the ship. One from 70 planes. They were very lucky. At Leyte Gulf, page change. In October of 1944, the ship received 3 hits. One from a kamikaze pilot that dove right into the ship. And they survived. If you know Biggie Bayard, you say, well, that's not his real name. His name is Marvin. Why do they call him Biggie? His name came from his love of playing sandlot football as a boy. And his hero was an All-American halfback from Marshall University called Biggie Goldberg. And so they called him Biggie Bayard, named after Biggie Goldberg from Marshall University. Several years ago, I came across the story of Joe Richmond. The family wanted to memorialize his story. Joe Richmond was captured by the Japanese also and held in Japan. Now, the fascinating part of the Joe Richmond story is that the family came to me to say, we know he died in Japan, in a prison camp, but we don't know anything else. Okay. So we started searching, and our library staff's really good at searching the internet and every site we can get into, and we'll spend hours and hours on something. And we found a diary from the man who was in prison at the same camp that Joe Richmond was in. And it was online. Now, he didn't talk about Joe, but he talked about the prison. And we know what prison Joe was in. And what happened is that Americans, as we got closer to the island, would bomb each night. Now, sometimes they were regular type bombs where we want to hit a specific target. Pinpoint bombing to destroy a building or a factory or an industry. And other times, they were what we call incendiary bombs. They are fire bombs. Those were dropped on nights when it was windy. Now, you've seen The Karate Kid, part 1, 2, 3, 4, and 75, and all the ones that they have, the new remakes and all that. Bamboo houses, sliding doors, paper. Imagine what an incendiary bomb on a windy night does to a Japanese city made of bamboo houses. They're burned to the ground. Literally, a whole city can burn to the ground. And that's what we did. One night, we were setting off the incendiary bombs near this prison, and the Japanese guards took out the Japanese political prisoners, the Japanese criminals, and took them to tents far away from the prison. And the fire from the incendiary bombs was burning its way to the prison. What did they do with the Americans? Locked them in their cells and left them there. That's how Joe died. A horrible way to go. If they tried to escape or did escape, then the Japanese shot them. That's why World War II veterans after World War II said, don't buy from Japan. Don't buy Japanese. We've worked our way back to August 6th, 1945. Bill Miner, again, in my first book, called me and said, yeah, I've got a story for you. I was a tail gunner on this plane crew. A tail gunner. Okay, if you don't know anything about a tail gunner, it means he's a little tiny boy, crawls through a tunnel to get to the back of the plane and mans machine guns. When the Japanese come at them, they can fire at the planes. And it swivels around, and you're stuck in this little tube back in there firing a machine gun, protecting the rear of the plane. The Enola Gay, Paul Tibbets, was the pilot who flew the Enola Gay and was assigned to drop the bomb on Hiroshima that day. He knew what he was doing. Did he feel guilty about it? I was invited by one of my ex-students in this course to go to a school in Ohio one night where Paul Tibbets was speaking. Does he regret what he did? No. He saved 1 million American lives. Doesn't feel bad about that. He did what he had to do. Did the Enola Gay? Now, your vision of it probably is, here's the Enola Gay, a single plane flying toward Japan from Tinian, where American ground crews were there, and men from Marshall County who saw the Enola Gay lift off because they worked on the airfield, yes, again, from Marshall County at Tinian. One alone, he had escort planes. One of those planes carried the tail gunner, Bill Miner, who said, I saw the fireball rise over Hiroshima as we sped away as fast as we could fly, because we didn't know if the fireball would hit us and what kind of wind force would come from that explosion. He saw the rise of a mushroom cloud over Hiroshima. From Moundsville, lived on 12th Street. Cool. Okay. He's there. At age 18 or 17, he was in a one-man lifeboat over the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean because one of the planes he was in had been shot down. And luckily, they spotted the lifeboats of these guys because he thought, I'm dead. Here I am in my teens in a single-man boat, and all these other guys are in single-man boats. Hopefully they see us because this is the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. It goes for miles. What are we going to do? They saved him for this. John Ginter, who I mentioned earlier, and John was a retired lieutenant colonel, I believe, from the military. He got a pension from them. And he's the father of Carolyn Dalzell, son-in-law David Dalzell, that Fostoria connection. And John Ginter was on Shima. Now, it's an island off the coast of Okinawa. And Shima was where the reporter Ernie Pyle was killed in World War II. And, of course, John's behind his Jeep with his driver, and Ernie Pyle is in a Jeep with his driver, and there are other troops around. They're being shot at, and they keep yelling at Ernie Pyle, get behind the Jeep. They're going to kill you. And Ernie Pyle says, I can't see. What's going on? I can't see. Well, they shot him. And John was there. He witnessed that. So the tragic death of the famous reporter, Ernie Pyle, was witnessed by a Moundsville man. Now, we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Robert Oppenheimer and the scientists did not know what that bomb would do to a civilian population. And there were military people there also, but it was mainly a civilian population. And we didn't know what it would do. What does Japan know? They don't know. Tokyo's 100 miles away. We've destroyed every link of communication between Hiroshima and Tokyo. It's physically going to take someone to go into Hiroshima and then go to Tokyo and say what's happened. That's why it took 3 days for us to drop the second bomb, because they didn't know what happened. They couldn't understand what had happened at Hiroshima. So 100 experts were asked to go in to the bomb site. Shortly after the explosion, several days had passed. Now we know about radioactivity. They didn't. So John's among those 100 experts that are sent in, walking through the debris of Hiroshima. Well, John's proud of a Bronze Star that he earned too. John earned a Bronze Star on an island because he was in charge of water purification. That's his job. He purified water so you would have water to drink as a troop on the island. And he provided 20,000 men on one island drinking water, which was not available on that island at all. So he said, I got a Bronze Star for making water. Big deal. And he was proud of that. He was. Well, in Hiroshima, he picks up a little tiny bell. No, it wasn't very big. And he puts it in his pocket. Souvenir. And he comes back out, and they're checking him for radioactivity. And they get to his pocket, and the thing goes off. And they said, what you got in your pocket? He said, I picked up a bell in there. It's radioactive. Didn't harm him. Possibly. Had it in his pocket. He said, well, I've already had a daughter. If I don't have any other children, okay. So he came back home. He and his wife had another child, a son, Jay. Jay lived in Alaska, very well off, smart as his dad, smart as Carolyn, and he died. Possibly from the radioactivity that John carried from World War II and took his son's life. Because he died of a disease that could be traced to radioactivity. No effect. Yeah. People who were born in Hiroshima afterwards, their parents survived, had children who were disfigured by the radioactivity. They weren't even born then, but they were disfigured by the radioactivity. So there's a long life to this. My last person I want to talk about is Marvin Bennett. Now, if you know Marvin Bennett, he lives in Macon, West Virginia. He's 94 years old. He's a World War II veteran. He came in to get a notary last week at the library, and I said, Marvin, you're a World War II veteran. I have to have your story. Oh, I didn't do anything. Yeah, you're like every one of 1,500 veterans I've interviewed that didn't do anything. So I convinced him to come back, and we did talk, and I'm still writing up his story. But I'll give you a glimpse of it. Marvin was with the occupation troops in Japan. Now, before he got to Japan, they sent him to Okinawa. Now, the Battle of Okinawa was over, a bloody, messy war to take that island so we could have a base to fly into Japan quickly, drop bombs, have a base close to get those planes back safely. And at Okinawa, he was in armor, a tank. He was a machine gunner. He's deaf in one ear. He says, I'll tell you why I can't hear, because I did the machine gun right by the barrel of the cannon. And when they sent that off, we didn't have earplugs. So that literally blew my ear out. I hear out of one ear. And he was a machine gunner inside tanks. He said, okay, we're in a tank. We're in Okinawa. They told us our tanks are impregnable. We can't be destroyed. So we got on the beach the first night. and we're sleeping on the beach. And he said, we don't know where we are. We can't see anything. It's pitch black. We get out of our tanks. We sleep on the ground, and we hear clicking all the time. It's these fist-sized crabs crawling on the beach. He said, we were awake all night because we were afraid it was the Japanese sneaking up on us. It was the clicking of the crabs as they were going along the beach. It says, when the sun came up, we looked at our shiny tanks that had been on Okinawa before we got there, obliterated by Japanese armor-piercing shells. Oh my. What about our impregnable tanks that I'm going to be in, that I'm going to drive on Okinawa, and I will not get killed in this tank? And here they are, blown to bits all over the place, the sun shining off their metal. How'd they do it? How'd the Japanese hide these gigantic guns? Well, when they bury people in Okinawa, they bury them in tombs, above ground. And they bury them in hillsides, too. And they put the cave entrance, and they decorate the cave entrance. Well, that's a pretty slick place to hide the cannon. So they had wooden wheels. They'd haul that cannon back inside of a hollow mountain. We'd obliterate what we could see. When the American troops would land, they would drop the cover, roll that tank out, and blow our tanks to pieces before we could figure out where it was. They rolled that tank or that cannon back inside the hillside and blew our American tanks to bits. We finally did defeat the Japanese on Okinawa, but Marvin says they were all around us. And finally, the Marines went up both sides of the hill where the last ones were trapped and wiped them out to the last man. No prisoners. They didn't surrender. We'd have taken prisoners, but they wouldn't. After we take Okinawa and Marvin is done there, they send him to Tokyo. And at Tokyo, he says, parts of the city were bombed, other parts weren't, because they knew the hotel that they wanted to put MacArthur in when we conquered the Japanese. So the Dido Hotel was untouched. All around it was blown to bits, but the hotel was untouched because pinpoint bombing could do that. So here's MacArthur's hotel with running water, bathrooms, cots, linens, all this stuff, kitchens working. Yeah, and that's where Marvin and his guards are located. Marvin is a guard of Douglas MacArthur in Tokyo. Cool. Really neat. And then he went to Hiroshima. So we had to go down and see what it looked like. Oh, smart move, Marvin. Let's go down to a radioactive city. So here they are, and he says, there's nothing left. Nothing. We literally burned every structure to the ground. Now, do you have any idea how much heat an atomic bomb generates? When that bomb went off, it instantly created 1 million, got that? 1 million degrees heat instantly. Nothing stood after that went off. So remember, they're bamboo and paper houses. They're gone. They are gone. Can you imagine anybody surviving that? But yet there were people who survived that. Yes. The peace light today burns in Hiroshima. A peace light will burn forever in Hiroshima as a symbol that we must never, ever use these kind of weapons against mankind again. And it's a sight that you need to see, whether it's a picture of it online or whatever. I mean, it's a symbol of what was done to end the war, which had to be done, but at the same time, to never use those kind of weapons. Now, if you think an atomic bomb was bad, you don't even know anything unless you know what nuclear weapons will do. This was a toy. An atomic bomb compared to a nuclear bomb is a toy. We don't ever want to detonate any of these. They're deterrents. That's all they're ever meant to be. Marshall County has several World War II veterans that are still alive. And Bill Harris called us from Cameron the other day and said, "Do you have a list of the ones who are alive?" I mean, there's not many of them at all. They're going to be in their mid 90s. Even the youngest ones are going to be in their early 90s. Um, so the ones I could think of that I know are alive in Marshall County are, of course, Marvin Bennett from McMecken, who's 94. George Burdett of Moundsville. We all know George. Um, and I believe he's in his mid 90s also, isn't he? Bill Harris of Cameron, Foster Noble of Washington Lands, Rex Young of St. Joe Settlement. We've done all their stories. Rex was in, I think, like 3 plane crashes in his military career, survived all of them. Very lucky to be in 3 plane crashes and survive. We're still going to write the books. We're publishing volume 11 this November. I will begin to tell you this because I need to commit myself to this more and more, that volume 12 of November 2021 will be the last of that series. My wife will tell you I need to quit. They're tearing me apart. Inside, these guys' stories are tearing me apart. I can't continue to listen to some of these anymore in that quantity. Now, our recent book is a book on Ed Hoskins from McMecken, who now lives in Wheeling. He was a Green Beret in Vietnam, and for 2 months I interviewed him every Tuesday for 2 hours. And I did a book on Ed Hoskins, 173 pages, 70-some pictures, mainly all his, from Vietnam, what it was like to be a Green Beret. Oh, not Army surrounded by American soldiers. To be a Green Beret in Vietnam, surrounded by 3 or 4 or 5 other Green Berets and 800 mountain people who are your only allies in the war. And you don't know if they are or not. They did that for a year. 51 years later, he was a very bitter man. I think he's mellowed by telling this story. Why did he tell it? I want my kids to know why I treated them the way I did. I want my kids to know. That's the only reason he did this. So, yeah, we don't always get in the blood and guts. We don't always get in the gory things. Sometimes they don't want to tell us. Sometimes you can't hear it. But it's been an adventure. What has led me to today, being here, and who knows where it will lead me. We're going to continue to write. Not the big, thick books that weigh a ton when you have to go to a book signing. They're going to be small paperback books like we've been doing lately. And Roseanne and I are going to continue. We have some other veterans we want to do special stories on. But I personally, to put 11 together, and I've been fighting myself to put it together with deadlines, and I finally told Patty I can't do it. I just got to lay back and set another deadline. It's hard. And if someone down the road wants to pick this up, hooray for them. Because it is a task. And you have to dedicate yourself to it. Because it's not something you do haphazardly. It's not something you do once in a while. Every time you see a veteran, you say, "Can I do your story?" And when that veteran who was in Vietnam comes from a town in Ohio who had the largest percentage of Vietnam veterans killed in the war from his town, looks at you and I say, we can honor the guys in your town too by you telling your story. And his face turns red and tears come to his eyes and he says, I can't do it. And you never ask again. Those you live with all the time. And it's been an adventure. Patty and I have been many places, out in the woods. We've been everywhere. And she has supported me through all this, and Roseanne has been supportive of me through all this. And I can't thank those people enough for that. My son-in-law who does all the books. But it's been worth it. it's been worth it all. Because when a veteran comes up to you at a gas pump in Ohio by the Kroger store and says, Gary, how are you? Oh, hi, Mike. I did your story. Yeah, how are you? Thank you so much. Or when somebody comes up and says, thank you for what you do. That means a lot because there's a lot of heartache with the books, a lot of internal pain we just bury. But it's worth it. So I hope someday down the road, maybe the young girls back there will say, this is a project that I want to do. And believe me, it's worth it. It is worth it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll take any. And here comes Kara to take my microphone away.
Thank you. Yeah, let's hear it for Gary Ryder. That was amazing. So thank you guys all for coming. Thanks for everybody who's watching on Facebook as well. Next week we have kind of a fun one. It's a little bit different. We have the Oglebay Good Zoo coming. It's another kid-focused one. After that, we've got CJ Plogger on the penitentiary. And last, I think we have Sean Duffy on the Benwood mine disaster. So that'll finish out August. So we'll have one every week through August. We do have the flyers back there if you'd like to pick one up so you have the schedule. We'd also love, we have a kind of a sign-up sheet there with email addresses if you'd like to be notified if we have to cancel one of these for weather or just any of our other events. Well, there's also a column on there that says, how did you hear about this? Because that really helps us know how to advertise and what people are seeing. So that's very helpful as well. So thank you guys for coming, and we hope to see you back next week.